Hello, this is Common Ground. Today we're here with Lizbeth de la Cruz Santana to talk about documenting migrant stories through murals. Lizbeth is a cultural worker and interdisciplinary qualitative Latinx public scholar specializing in contemporary migration processes. And she currently works as an assistant professor in the Black and Latino Studies department at Baruch College in New York City. Lizbeth, welcome.
No, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to first of all talk to you about this conversation and the topic. I've seen your work before, especially your documentary. So it's an honor, honestly.
Thanks for doing this. So I thought uh, we might talk a little bit about one of your project murals. You have really done a lot of work. You're planning new murals in different locations. And one piece that I was particularly interested in, since you mentioned the documentary, The Vertical Border, actually we can see the mural in one of the scenes. So before we get started with the mural project, I wanted to hear a little bit about your own background and training in order to understand what motivated you to work on this kind of project.
Yeah, so I grew up in the US. I was born here, but my parents were born in Mexico, specifically in Jalisco. So since we were young, we would usually go to Jalisco, especially in August, to visit family. And it's just kind of like a tradition from our family to do so. But in crossing, I started realizing different aspects, right, of our parents letting us know, if we're crossing by car, just sleep or don't talk to the officer at the border. Now that we were in high school, it was just show your ID and don't speak much, right? Just kind of like this idea of don't tell them more than we need to tell them, right? But at sometimes my dad was sent to secondary inspection. So this is when I started realizing that, unfortunately, my parents weren't treated the same way as maybe other US citizen parents were. And it had to do a lot with when, you're coming of age, you start realizing that, Mexicans were treated differently, specifically in California. So for me, it just started bringing more awareness about immigration through my own personal connections to it. I've also had the opportunity to grow up on both sides of the border. So that has also helped enrich my questions about U.S. childhood arrivals and what deportation might do to them, or deportability as well. But I think for me specifically, coming into this project called Humanizing Deportation, right at the beginning of my doctoral studies at UC Davis, was what really amplified all of this knowledge and projects that are basically creative interventions regarding deportation and immigration. So through this project, I was able to see the border for the first time in 2016. And it was actually the first day that we knew the results for the 2016 election. So that was just very impactful, not only knowing that we had an incoming administration that was very vocal about anti-immigrant narratives and just the plans that the administration had back then. And then seeing the border friends in person for the first time it just magnified things so much. But what really made it even more impactful for me was meeting people who had faced deportation, just talking to them and getting to know their stories.
So let's move on a little bit to the Playas, the Tijuana mural project. Then I think when people will hear more about the project, what will strike them is, of course, the visual aspect of this. But this is not all you have done. There's also an archive where people can find migrants' stories. But why specifically did you decide to work on murals? Because surely this is very time and labor intensive. Why did you want to do murals?
Yeah, and I'll start backwards, right? It is labor intensive. It's a lot of commitment. Right now I'm working simultaneously in 3 murals, and it's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of labor, but I think doing it with a sense of care for the storytellers, the community members are supporting, and for myself as well, I think it's very important. And why murals? I think for me, murals, when I first encountered the border in Playas de Tijuana, specifically in Friendship Park, seeing the art that was there, invited so many questions for me, but specifically thinking more about the Deported Veterans mural, which is an upside down American flag And once you see it from another point of view, you see the names of deported veterans. So when I first saw this at night in Playas to Tijuana in November, I wonder why. First of all, we had an upside down flag, and then why the names were there. And I was very familiar with the titles of the veterans there because I have family members, specifically one of my sisters was in the military. So I was just wondering, like, okay, why are these names on this side of the border, right? So I had no knowledge of deported veterans back then. But then one of the professors who was doing the tour told me, well, there's deported veterans. So I was so confused and I couldn't understand why this was the case. And then again, right? So the art first kind of like allowed me to ask these questions, but then meeting them and talking to the deported veterans, specifically in Tijuana, just basically brought me into a whole different world and allowed me to see that there was a need between digital storytelling, muralism, right? So we went to Tijuana to do digital storytelling with deported communities, but the mural, I think for me, is what really made everything fuse together and come together. But at the border, I realized that if that professor wasn't there to tell me, then it would have been a missed opportunity in a sense of like, I would have just walked away confused, right? Or maybe having to do more research. But what if I didn't have the capacity to do so, right? So this is where through my interventions, I wanted to find a way to make the wall speak, right? And tell these stories that I started to get to know while doing fieldwork in Tijuana.
Let's go a little bit deeper into the mural project in Tijuana. You've also published a book chapter to describe a little bit this experience. And you say in this book chapter that your own mural project is part of the Humanizing Deportation project. So first of all, could you give us a little bit more context? What is the idea behind the Humanizing Deportation project?
Yeah, so Humanizing Deportation was actually born a little bit before 2016, but we started doing the training for the team, which was back then composed of all female researchers from UC Davis and other campuses. It then branched out to colleagues in Tijuana and Ciudad Juarez, and we have teams all over now documenting stories of deportation. But back then, the idea was for Humanizing Deportation to respond to the growing numbers of people who had faced deportation and found themselves in Tijuana specifically. During the first round of field work, our idea was to do at least 12 stories. And that was just thinking like, okay, we'll just go in and document these stories and speak to the community there. But once we arrived in Tijuana, honestly, 12 stories wouldn't do justice to what we were seeing. And then people realizing that there was an opportunity and a platform for them to tell their stories. So many people reached out to us to talk, right? And then document this experience, like their testimonio. So there was a need that we saw, right? So this is why this project now has grown so much. And today I feel like we have like a little bit over 500 stories currently. So from 12 in 2016 to 500, it just shows you, right? Like the magnitude and the need for people to feel like they're being heard, and for others to also learn about immigration experiences, deportation, asylum seekers, and what causes displacement for migration and return, right, and deportation. But this project basically started with that idea, right, to document these stories and then to create consciousness, right, to not only educate, but also start documenting and preserving these stories and making them accessible to, at least for now, a bilingual audience in Spanish and English.
In your work, you describe the Playas de Tijuana mural project as a community mural, and it's specifically about childhood arrivals. Could you explain to our listeners what you mean by a community mural and what do you mean by childhood arrivals?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So what allowed me to think more about the art, yes, was seeing the mural, the Deported Veterans mural at the beach, but I realized also that the storytellers felt that they needed to do something else, not just only telling their stories, right? So documenting their narratives was very helpful, and it was something that a lot of people appreciated, specifically the storytellers. But then you leave the field, right? You stop doing the field work. The story is published. People are listening to it. What's next? That's the question. And I realized during those 3 years that I was going to Tijuana back and forth as a graduate student, for me, I felt like, okay, well, I'm connecting with so many of the other storytellers because we would do just very informal meetups, or we would see each other at the beach, or, just literally community building organically. And then I realized, you know what, like we can do something more. And it felt so natural to propose a mural, right? So my idea was, hey, let's paint a mural together with some of the storytellers here in Playas de Tijuana who constantly see this mural, the border specifically, right? And for them to see this mural as a representation that they matter and that they exist, but also to juxtapose what this border fence means, right? And make it a little bit more nuanced. And it started as a small scale project, right? Where I was able to curate a couple of the stories from the people in Tijuana specifically, and then just plan it out, right? So let's paint together and then at the faces of the borders. It was just for us and for them, right? It was just for this small group. But I think people seeing the mural come to life at the border specifically, there was this need, right, and representation of the stories. And I think this is why this project has grown so much, because it was feeling something that maybe the community in Tijuana and just overall people who had faced deportation wanted to see and to feel that this mural represented their stories too, even if they're not illustrated in it.
And now to turn briefly to the childhood arrivals, which are specifically the stories that you wanted to document in Tijuana. Who are childhood arrivals?
So for me, childhood arrivals, I think my concept of it has really been influenced by meeting some of the deported childhood arrivals, right? So people who were deported, who grew up in the U.S. because they were brought in as babies, young children, basically minors who migrated to the U.S., regardless if they came in with a permanent residency status, through a visa, or undocumented. The fact is that they grew up here and we helped raise them in this country. But what really allowed me to think more of a general idea of deported U.S. child arrivals was literally thinking about those who had faced displacement or deportation before the DACA program came into place in 2012. Because this was the generation that I was meeting at Tijuana. People who, if you see them literally and start talking to them, you're like, wow, you are echoing the experiences of people who are still in the U.S. and fighting for the DREAM Act, right? The dreamers. The fact is that you got deported before then, right? Even without a criminal record. So I think for me, meeting people who have been in a way silenced and exiled, who could have benefited from the DACA program, allowed me to complicate this concept again, right? Of who is a U.S. child arrival. So this is what the Mural project intends to answer and really put at the forefront, right? To redefine and reconsider our criteria of defining who U.S. child arrivals are. Because the way that we talk about childhood arrivals, still to today about the dreamers, is very, very exclusive, right? Thinking more about only those who have aspirations for higher education, maybe military service, those that are contributing to the economy through like educational pathways. So what about everyone else who has already been impacted, right? And is still fighting to find a way to return, at least through a visa, right? To visit home.
Tijuana is a northern border city on the Mexican side of the US-Mexico border. San Diego is on the other side. Could you take us briefly to this location? What is the symbolism of this place? And people who go there nowadays, what are they going to see when they want to look at your mural?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that becomes a shock, or just an aspect that is very emotional to see on both sides of the border in Tijuana, or if you've seen it through the Border State Park on the San Diego side, is the fact that this border fence is crossing the ocean, right? It's right on the beach, cutting through the sand. There's barbed wire at the bottom of the fencing as well. And currently now, so since 2016 till now, specifically like a year and a half ago, the border has been transformed. So you will see more fencing that is higher up, more dangerous looking. The idea is to deter migration, but I feel like it's also to kill people, right? To hurt people attempting to cross. And then you see the mural. And I'm very thankful that through this renovation process that happened during the Biden administration, before he left office, the border was reconstructed, specifically in Playas de Tijuana, and many of the murals that were there in Friendship Park were taken down and literally just wiped out. And new fencing was added, which was higher, a little bit more dangerous, like I mentioned. But the mural project, the Playas de Tijuana mural project, was the only one left behind. It's the only one that they didn't remove. So I'm very thankful for that because it's also like a testament, right? That these stories continue to exist. They continue to speak to people. And the fact is that we decided to work on this part of the fence, and it's so hard to replace this specific part. So it just worked on our behalf. But seeing the mural as it's weathering and it's changing because it's supposed to stay up for 10 years. So 2019, 2021 was the last time we worked on it. So 10 years from 2021 is when, the fence should literally erase these stories. But it's a clock, right? So this is how I want people to see the mural. You see it, you hopefully felt called in to go closer to it and then touch whatever is left of the faces. If there's a QR code, please scan it, right? Or just look up on Instagram, Playas de Tijuana Mural Project. You'll see a little bit more of the social media of the project. But the idea is for people to go up to the mural, right? So to feel called in from far away, because the baby blue paint also allows you to see or think about the fact that we're erasing the border through stories, like human stories, people that are still alive today and waiting and fighting to have change happen for them and for others in the situations that they're facing. But then, not only seeing the faces and take your photo, right, but touch the faces. That's the idea, right, of touching the surface, the faces, feel the paint, but also feel who they are. And then if you get the chance to scan the QR code that accompanies each portrait, then hopefully you hear it and you understand why this person specifically was selected, and then why together they're communicating a specific message as well. And hopefully you feel called in to also share their story, right, through social media, because the link that you'll be getting is a YouTube video, and that it's extremely shareable, streamable, and very friendly for users. So I hope that this is a way for people to also contribute to this conversation.
What work did the making of the mural project entail for you in terms of finding a suitable location, but also finding participants or storytellers? And in terms of this second point, I'm particularly interested in how to involve migrants in a sensitive manner, because it seems when people's faces and stories become public, this also means that these same storytellers expose themselves, they make themselves vulnerable. So how did you go about finding, first of all, a location, which can't have been easy, and also persuading the storytellers to be a part of this project?
Yeah, so I could tell you, and it's from an experience that I'm going through now. Last year, I received a grant to do murals within the U.S., right? So in the interior of the U.S. It's been so difficult. Thankfully, now I have a wall secure, at least for New York City. I'm still thinking more about the Central Valley and Fresno to secure a wall there. But my experience in securing a wall that will be more friendly in hosting a mural of this kind, right? Stories of mixed status people, deportation, specifically undocumented people, has been so difficult within the U.S. to the point where I'm like, maybe I should just change the project because it's not as easy as I thought at the border, right? Because at the border, literally, Playas de Tijuana, I was connected to one of the artists who paints there. And I was connected specifically by Robert Vivar, who's one of the storytellers in the project. So I talked to Enrique Chiu and he said, okay, cool. Where do you want to paint? And I just pointed to the location. He's like, okay. But literally there was no one I had to ask but the community there, meaning the people who are impacted by the border fence, right? So the deported community there. So it was actually them who helped me secure this fence, right? Because it's a fence at the end of the day. And it was just their blessing, right? I needed to have a community's blessing to do so. And I feel like we've kind of already established not only like a friendship, but trust, right? Like there's the trust that they know that my intentions are these type of things. And then this is also going to help them in their advocacy efforts. And that kind of goes to your other part of the question. The people that are a part of this mural project are people who are already very visible and telling their stories through social media. There's a lot of news reports. Some of them have even like children's books, documentaries. So they're very public people with their story. So I felt more comfortable working with them versus reaching out to other people that I wanted and I wish could have been a part of this mural project, but they weren't as visible, right, or vocal about their situation. And it makes sense, right? Even if you had faced deportation, doesn't mean that you're safe in the other side of the border, right? So specifically like in Tijuana. So calling attention in that capacity could also be cause other problems, I would say, specifically if you're a deported veteran. So for me, yeah, like I wish I could have had 3 other stories that could have that never made it to the border, right? To this mural project. One specifically because he passed away, right? And then 2 others because they had pending immigration cases that they wanted to keep pursuing to return home. So again, people who were already visible with their stories, so that allowed me to feel comfortable. And it's a method that I continue to use moving forward through the other mural projects that I have. And people who are literally are unafraid, right, to say this is what happened to me and tell their testimony for others to also feel seen.
I'm sure all the stories you have selected are important or striking in some way, but could you perhaps think of one story that you would like to share with the audience right now?
Yeah, so from the Playas de Tijuana mural project specifically, I mean, there's so many, like you said, right? They're all so important, but I will talk about one specifically that there's no digital narrative for this storyteller, and his name is just Jose. So we actually met Jose in 2021 while we were installing the portraits, some of the first portraits, right? So we've had 2019, we installed the first, I think it was 7 portraits then, pandemic happened, and then 2021, we came back. And these new set of stories were actually people who had a criminal record, they were permanent residents and were deported. And there was just 2 others that were undocumented and then were deported. And Jose was one of them. So we were there installing the first 4 new faces, and he caught my attention right away because he had so many face tattoos, like you could see his tattoos. And he looked like my friends or people that I've known like in LA, right? So his cholito style. And for me, it was just like, wow, like, why is he here? Just, sitting at the beach, literally through the fence, right? So he's looking into San Diego. And then you see there's a young girl standing in the middle of the beach at Border State Park. And then after talking to him, he basically told us that that's his girlfriend and that she can't come to the Mexican side because she has DACA, and that he was recently deported because he was undocumented. So I was like, wow, right? So he was asking us what we were doing there because he realized most of us were from the US, right? Because the way that we talked, just the English, right? That we were speaking there. So then he just started disclosing more of his experience recently coming to Tijuana, literally being pushed out of the US. And he said, well, I have facial tattoos, literally all over his face and his body, right? And he said, I can't even go into an Oxxo or 7-Eleven because they're afraid of me. They don't treat me like a person here in Mexico. I hardly speak Spanish, so it's really hard for me to navigate life here. So I just come to the beach, and whenever my girlfriend's here and could travel, I just see her through the fence. So I have a photo of him, and I'll look for it to send it to you, talking to his girlfriend on the phone on the other side of the border. But again, 2 people who are, the dreamer population, right? The people want to consider. U.S. childhoodarrivals, one of them has DACA, one of them, if he had DACA, lost it, right? And then was deported. So his story, unfortunately, is not on the archive because I think there's also value in not documenting everything. Some of these stories are only meant for the people who get to experience them, right? And I think his story, because he had just faced deportation, he needed time also to process, right? So I invited him to be a part of the mural, and he said yes, but his only request was for me to erase his tattoos. And when I did, right, I remember I was working on it on Procreate, and I was like, wow, this is Jose, right? So I sent him a photo of it. He's like, wow, that's me, right? Like, that's him. That's how he envisions himself and sees himself. So I think that was one of the most rewarding parts of finishing this mural project in 2021 is realizing that you could return their dignity in this capacity.
Thank you for sharing that story. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about the lessons you have taken away from your work on the Tijuana's mural project, and also thinking a little bit more broadly about other mural projects you have worked on since then. So you have mentioned some of the difficulties already in terms of securing a wall, and perhaps thinking about what might happen with the mural as time goes on. So what were the lessons or takeaways for you?
I think people become fascinated with the idea of doing a mural, right? It seems a very, what's the word that people always tell me? Ambitious project. I think people always think it's so ambitious. I'm like, well, there's a need for it. I developed a framework that really works, right? So now I'm working with my students, and it's going to be our second mural project together. Last year we did El Paso del Norte mural project installed in Ciudad Juarez. And I think for me, that really solidified the idea that maybe the people that I reached out to before were not the right audience, right? The right people that I wish could have been collaborators and literally allies. So after, just a lot of reflection, I realized, there's another community willing to support and do this type of collaboration and to facilitate, right, these stories beyond the border. And that was my students, right? So when I first got to New York City, they're curious to see who's this new person, and they start asking you questions. And I'm not from New York. I grew up in California and between Mexico. And I think they were just really interesting to see, right? Like, oh, wow. So how is it that you are here? Like, what's your work about? And this is where I introduced the idea, right? Let's paint a mural together so you could see really what I do, right? And why I do it. So I feel like now I planted like all of these seeds, right, within my students, right? That now they're so excited and just keep asking me when are we going to start painting, right, in New York. Because for me, when I arrived here in 2023 in August, I realized that the border was here specifically because migrants were being bused from Texas to New York City. So I would start seeing people in the train, specifically women with their kids selling candy, and then walk through the Roosevelt Hotel. And I realized, wow, this reminds me so much of Tijuana, right? So I started seeing the parallels and like the blending or the echoes between both those places. So for me, that became something to realize quickly, right? Okay, there's a need to document these stories, but how do I do it in the sense of like involving people to understand the human side of why people are being bused to New York City? Why are people still being deported? And then realizing that art is a medium that helps not only tell the stories, but helps us decompress as well. So this is something that I learned in Tijuana, that through the art making, and I could tell you one specific moment, it was in 2020 before the pandemic hit in Tijuana. We were there cleaning up the mural, and it was one of my friends, Ulises, who was seeking asylum, and then Tanya, who's represented in the mural. And it was just the three of us inside the water in Plaza Tijuana, just cleaning up the mural. And it hit me then. So like maybe a year and a half later, that this mural existed because they were being displaced from their home. So from El Salvador seeking asylum, in Ulises' case, and then Tanya, who grew up in the US and then deported. So it hit me then, right? So I've been on the go since day one, since project started. And it hit me. I was like, wow, this is sad, that this mural exists because you had to go through these things, right? And then because you were brave enough to tell your story. So I think for me, this is something that I think I always try to check in with, like, why this work? Why are we doing it now? And what I hope happens. And sometimes what I hope to happen is even beyond what I imagined. So I could only think about the future, right? Through continuing this work, the mural projects, which is a long series of murals that I hope to in the US in response to the lack of finding a wall, specifically in California, which has been so resistant to a mural project of this capacity. In New York City, the day that we announced it, we had 3 proposals for a wall, literally 3. And that was through the help of my students, right? So we recorded a video. So I hope that other states who are who say they're friendly towards the undocumented community really check themselves, because it's not the case, right? The Central Valley in California, for me, I grew up there, right? So I was born in LA and then grew up in Compton and California, specifically Fresno after 15. And I noticed the hesitation, right, to stand up for what's right, right? And I think that even though a lot of the stories that are being represented in this first mural are from the Central Valley, like its own people, there's so much resistance, there's so much political, interventions, when I would expect that at the border. But it's never been this hard, So this is something that I'm like, okay, if you want to really make a difference within the US through murals, it's just things that you have to go through different walls and barriers literally to accomplish this here. But it's not impossible, right? So I think for me, having platforms like yours, right, I think allows me to also have people understand that doing these type of projects is not easy. It takes so much work and a lot of negotiating with people who, have power. Mm-hmm.
Doing a project of this kind is, I assume, always challenging. But now we live in especially difficult times for immigrants in the United States. And so I wanted to ask you for a final reflection about impact. You have done, of course, a lot of work on social media, people who will follow your social media accounts, Instagram. I think you're on TikTok also, where you document the work that you're doing for these projects. So people can get a glimpse of the work that you are doing. And I was wondering, first of all, if you want to heighten the impact that a project of this kind can have, what sort of media work or social media work around the mural and the story creation is required? And following on from this, what kind of social or policy impact can we realistically hope for? And I understand that you see this as an educational project, as art. In a way, it is also resistance to the current model of immigration enforcement. But what kind of impact can come from a project like this?
But yeah, and it's something that I think of, right? So I think I always try to think about what's the next step after finishing the murals, right? And what I always tell the storytellers who are part of this project is that this is your mural. After we're done, you could use it as you wish. So deported veterans, specifically with the Playas de Tijuana at the border, use the mural for their advocacy efforts. And I could tell you from this mural project, Robert Rivera is not a deported veteran, but he advocates for them. He is a deported permanent resident who is now in San Diego. The mural project, it was a platform that he also used to advocate for himself and his return. Alex Murillo, a deported veteran, also used the mural project as a way and recognizes the mural and art as a way that created this pathway for him to return to the U.S. Andy de Leon, which is one of the oldest veterans that we know of that have faced deportation, the same thing. So they use the art, right? It's their art, their portraits, their stories to advocate, right? To create public consciousness of what's happening. So it has impact policy. Through the Biden administration, when the program that was announced to return veterans, the mural project was referenced constantly, right? As a photo, as a reference of like, these are some of the people impacted, right? And this program would benefit them specifically. So the mural has become like a reference, not only a cultural reference, but also political reference from even the administrations, right? That the former administration specifically. So for me, like, you never imagine these things to happen. You just do the work and then just see what the response is. But thinking more specifically, deported veterans have been the ones who gravitate more towards the mural projects, right? So in the summer, we worked on one together. And this one's also installed right next to the Playas de Tijuana. And it's still right now, they're visible in Playas de Tijuana on the new fence. And again, it incorporates the same thing, QR codes, portraits that we painted in different locations in the Central Valley. And then it made its way to the border. So for me, I think it's important to think about the next steps, right? So for the new murals that I'm doing, but then having them be within the US about a community that is still here, it's really important to engage local, politicians, state representatives, because obviously they know these stories. It's not like, oh my God, I'm finding out something new. Deported veterans, the government knows, right? Like these are not new things. What these conversations are starting is creating impact within people who might be detached from these realities, or for the people who do feel like these stories resonate with them to feel more empowered. So I think this is where we're trying to blend in, right, your own advocacy efforts and just people's public knowledge about these stories and testimonials at the end is that there are ways to do so, right? So I'm trying to present this method, right, or framework that digital storytelling, portraits, murals can make a difference, right? And of course, the end goal is always to impact policy, right? Impact policy through their stories. And this is where I think literally putting the art in people's face and allowing them to touch the art breaks down all of these barriers, right? That we should never engage with art. That, for example, the school that I work in, it's a business school at the end of the day. This type of work is not done in New York City so easily within the institution, right? And like over here fighting for funds, advocating for this type of project. And it's draining, honestly. It's draining. So again, I'm here now and I'm going to continue this work. But I think it's really telling, right, of how it's literally a community backing up people who want to feel represented and literally tell their stories, not only to, again, right, like humanizing their stories. I think we're beyond that at this point. It's literally having them be represented with dignity and honored. And this is the work that we're doing now with this lens, because, and I echo the words of Yosima Reyes, who's also part of this mural project that will be installed in New York City and Fresno, is that, people are tired, undocumented people are tired of arguing and advocating for people to see them as people, as a human being. And I totally resonate with that. Like, we shouldn't be teaching you how to like recognize someone's humanity. What we should be teaching you is why people are literally undocumented, why we keep an undocumented population in this country, why we illegalize people. And through hearing their stories, I hope people get to see that, right? To start recognizing the structures. And hopefully they don't care when it's their turn, right? For their turn to care. So this is the idea, right? For us to echo in these stories through, community by creating a community mural with students. And I think New York City has been honestly just a gift in being so welcoming to this mural project. And there's gonna be a lot of murals in New York City and throughout the next month. So I'm very thankful for that.
Thank you, Lizbeth, for joining me to talk about your mural project and, of course, for doing this kind of work. This was Dr. Lizbeth de la Cruz Santana from Baruch College, here with me on Common Ground. I'm Sonja Wolf. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.